I never thought the sound of ripping fabric could echo so loudly in a church, or that a single slap could shatter not just my dignity but expose the greatest secret of my life. There I stood in what was left of my modest wedding dress, the torn white fabric hanging like broken wings, my cheeks stinging from my sister-in-law's manicured hand, when I heard those unmistakable footsteps, confident, measured, powerful, approaching from the back of the church. Through my tears I saw him, the man nobody knew existed in my life, dressed in a suit worth more than this entire wedding, his presence commanding instant silence from the 100 guests who just witnessed my humiliation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Emma, and if you passed me on the street, you wouldn't look twice. I'm the woman who shops at thrift stores not because it's trendy, but because it's necessary, who cuts her own hair in her bathroom mirror, who brings homemade lunch to work every day in recycled containers. To my fiancé, I's family, I was the charity case their precious son decided to marry out of pity. To my own family, I was the one who finally found someone willing to overlook my lack of ambition, my plain looks, my simple dreams. They all thought they knew my story, the mediocre woman who somehow convinced a decent man from a respectable family to propose. But stories, like people, are rarely what they appear on the surface. I work as a seamstress in a small alteration shop tucked between a laundromat and a failing bookstore. My hands, rough from years of needle pricks and iron burns, have hemmed $1,000 dresses I could never afford, taken in wastes of designer suits for people who barely acknowledged my existence. Every day, I sit in that cramped back room with fluorescent lights that make everyone look sick, listening to customers complain about the most minor imperfections, while I carefully reconstruct their expensive garments. They speak about their vacation homes and investment portfolios as if I'm not there, just another invisible service worker in their privileged lives. Ryan's family never understood what he saw in me. His mother, Victoria, made that crystal clear from our first meeting at their country club, where I showed up in a borrowed dress that was 2 sizes too big, safety pinned in the back where no one could see. She looked at my chipped nail polish, my drugstore makeup, my nervous habit of tucking my hair behind my ear, and I could see her calculating how quickly she could convince her son that this was a mistake. His sister Penelope was even less subtle, actually asking Ryan in front of me if he'd lost a bet or was going through some kind of rebellious phase. The engagement happened at a Denny's at 2 a.m., which should tell you everything about the kind of romance we appeared to have. Ryan proposed with a simple band he'd saved from months to afford, getting down on one knee right there between the sticky vinyl booths while our waitress pretended not to watch. I said yes before he even finished asking, not because I was desperate, but because I genuinely loved this man who saw something in me that I'd almost forgotten existed. He was a junior accountant at a small firm, making decent money but nothing spectacular, and together we planned a life that was modest but ours. What Ryan didn't know, what nobody knew, was that every night when I said I was working late at the shop, I was actually going home to a different life entirely. 3 years ago, before I met Ryan, before I became the woman everyone saw as beneath them, I signed a contract that changed everything. It was supposed to be temporary, a business arrangement that made sense on paper, but became something neither of us expected. The man I married in a private ceremony with ironclad NDAs and no witnesses except 2 lawyers wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of rich that governments consulted, that influenced global markets with a single decision. Alexander Thorne isn't a name most people would recognize, and that's by design. While tech billionaires chase headlines and social media influence, Alexander built his empire in the shadows: private equity, hostile takeovers, the kind of financial moves that happen in boardrooms most people don't even know exist. When we met, I was altering a suit for one of his executives who'd missed his appointment. Alexander came to pick it up himself, irritated and impatient, until he saw me hand-stitching a button with the kind of precision that made him stop and actually look at who was doing the work. Our arrangement was supposed to be simple. He needed a wife to satisfy his grandmother's dying wish to see him married, and I needed money for my father's cancer treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. 6 months, we agreed. Maybe a year at most. But something shifted during those late-night conversations in his penthouse office. Both of us workaholics, who understood dedication, who found comfort in each other's silence. The contract expired 2 years ago, but neither of us ever brought up ending it. Instead, we fell into a routine that shouldn't have worked but did. Him in his glass tower making billion-dollar decisions, me in my little shop making people's clothes fit better, and both of us meeting in the space between those worlds. I never told him about Ryan because how do you explain that you're engaged to someone else when you're already married? How do you tell the man who loves you in his own complicated way that you need something simpler, something that doesn't require security details and private jets, and constant fear that someone will discover who you really are? Alexander and I existed in a bubble that felt separate from real life, and I convinced myself I could maintain both worlds until I figured out what I really wanted. The wedding planning with Ryan was intentionally simple. A small church ceremony, reception in the church basement, potluck style where our friends would bring dishes. His family was horrified, constantly offering to pay for upgrades I politely declined. I made my own dress, spending 3 months hand-sewing every detail, creating something that might not have been expensive but was made with more love than any designer gown. It was supposed to be perfect in its imperfection, a celebration of two ordinary people choosing each other. The morning of the wedding, I stood in the church's tiny bridal room that smelled like old books and lemon pledge, looking at myself in the clouded mirror. My dress wasn't much, cotton and simple lace I'd found at a fabric store closing sale, but I'd made every stitch with my own hands, poured my hope for a normal life into every seam. My makeup was done by my cousin who'd watched YouTube tutorials, my hair styled by my mother who kept crying and having to start over. This was who I really was, I told myself. Not the woman who knew which fork to use at Alexander's business dinners, not the woman who could discuss international tax law with his lawyers. This was Emma, just Emma, and that should be enough. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The guests started arriving an hour before the ceremony, and I could see the divide immediately. Ryan's family on one side in their designer clothes and subtle sneers, my family on the other in their best outfits that were years out of style but worn with dignity. The flower arrangements were carnations from the grocery store. The music was my neighbor's daughter playing violin slightly off-key, and the whole scene was exactly what you'd expect from a budget wedding that prioritized love over appearance. Or so I kept telling myself as I heard Victoria's voice carry through the thin door, commenting on the rustic charm in a tone that made it clear she meant cheap. Everything fell apart exactly 3 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Penelope burst into the bridal room without knocking, her phone in one hand and a glass of champagne in the other. Champagne she'd brought herself because the church only had sparkling cider. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just her usual disdain but something closer to rage, and I knew immediately that something had changed, though I couldn't imagine what. "You lying little gold digger," she hissed. And before I could process what was happening, she grabbed the front of my dress with both hands and pulled. The sound of tearing fabric filled the room like a scream, the delicate cotton splitting from neckline to waist, exposing the simple white slip underneath. 3 months of work, hundreds of hours of careful stitching, destroyed in seconds by someone who'd never created anything with her own hands in her entire life. I stood frozen, looking down at my ruined dress, my mind unable to process what had just happened. But Penelope wasn't done. Her hand came across my face with enough force to knock me sideways, my hip hitting the vanity table, lipsticks and pins scattering across the floor. The slap echoed in the small room, and I tasted blood where my teeth cut the inside of my cheek, felt the heat spreading across my skin like fire. "Did you think we wouldn't find out?" she screamed, holding up her phone. "Did you think you could marry my brother while already being married to someone else? What was the plan, Emma? Divorce your rich husband after you'd secured Ryan as backup? Or were you planning to be a bigamist, collecting husbands like some kind of twisted game?" My blood turned to ice. On her phone screen was a grainy photo from a security camera, but clear enough. Alexander and me entering his private attorney's office last week, his hand on my lower back in that possessive way he had, both of us looking comfortable with an intimacy that couldn't be explained away as anything other than what it was. Someone had been following us, documenting us, and now everyone would know, but they'd only know the worst possible version of the truth. "Penelope, please," I started, trying to hold the torn pieces of my dress together with shaking hands. "It's not what you think. Let me explain." "Explain?" She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Explain how you're wearing a homemade rag to marry my brother while you're already married to someone else. Explain how you've been lying to everyone. pretending to be this simple, humble woman when you're nothing but a cheating, manipulative. The door opened again, and Ryan stood there, his face pale, his boutonniere already wilting. Behind him, I could see both our families crowding the hallway, their faces a mixture of confusion and that horrible eagerness people get when they're about to witness drama that isn't their own. He looked at my torn dress, at his sister's aggressive stance, at my face with Penelope's handprint already turning purple, and I saw the exact moment his heart broke. "Is it true?" he asked quietly, and somehow his soft voice was worse than Penelope's screaming. "Are you married to someone else?" I wanted to explain everything, the contract, the arrangement, how it had become something neither Alexander nor I had planned, how I'd fallen for Ryan anyway because he represented everything normal and safe and uncomplicated I thought I wanted. But the words died in my throat because how could any explanation make this better? I was standing there in a destroyed wedding dress, exposed as a liar in front of everyone who already thought I wasn't good enough, and nothing I could say would change the fundamental truth that yes, I was married to someone else. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, filled only by the distant sound of the violinist still playing, unaware that the wedding had already ended before it began. Victoria pushed past her son, looking at me with a satisfaction she didn't even try to hide. This was better than anything she could have hoped for. Not only was I not good enough for her son, I was actually a criminal, a bigamist, a fraud who'd been exposed at the perfect moment for maximum humiliation. "Call the police," she said crisply, pulling out her phone. "This is fraud, attempted bigamy. She needs to be arrested before she can run." That's when I heard them. Footsteps in the church, confident and unhurried, expensive shoes on old wooden floors. Everyone turned toward the sound, and I knew before I saw him, knew from the way the air changed, the way everything suddenly felt charged with electricity. Alexander didn't just walk into rooms. He commanded them, altered them with his presence alone. And now he was here, at my wedding to another man, about to witness my complete destruction. He appeared in the doorway like something out of a different world, and in a way, he was. 6'3", built like someone who'd learned to fight before he'd learned to negotiate. Wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His dark hair was perfectly styled, despite the humidity that had frizzed everyone else's. His sharp features set in an expression of controlled fury that made everyone instinctively step back. But it was his eyes that made my heart stop, gray like winter storms, focused entirely on me, taking in my torn dress, my bruised face, the complete humiliation of my situation. "Emma," he said, and his voice carried the kind of authority that made generals follow orders and CEOs surrender companies. "Are you hurt?" It was such a simple question. But the way he asked it, the way his eyes tracked every visible injury while his hands clenched into fists, told everyone in that room that whoever was responsible had just made the biggest mistake of their life. Victoria's phone slipped from her hand, clattering on the floor. Penelope took an unconscious step backward. Ryan looked between us, understanding dawning on his face that whoever this man was, he wasn't just some rich husband I'd hidden. He was something far more dangerous. "I'm okay," I whispered, though we both knew it was a lie. Nothing about this was okay. My wedding was destroyed, my secret was exposed, and the two separate lives I'd tried so hard to maintain had just collided in the most spectacular way possible. Alexander's gaze shifted to Penelope, and I watched her face drain of color as she realized she'd just assaulted someone under his protection. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as he took a single step forward, not threatening exactly, but promising something that made everyone lean away from his trajectory. "You tore her dress," he said conversationally as if commenting on the weather. "You put your hands on her." It wasn't a question, and Penelope didn't try to deny it. Her champagne glass shook in her hand, spilling onto her designer shoes, but she didn't seem to notice. Alexander pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then put it away, all while maintaining eye contact with her like a predator deciding if prey is worth the effort. "Who are you?" Victoria finally found her voice, trying to reclaim some authority in the situation. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to be here." Alexander's smile was winter itself, beautiful and deadly. "I'm Alexander Thorne," he said simply, and watched recognition dawn on the faces of those who knew the name. Ryan's uncle, who worked in finance, actually gasped. Someone whispered, "The hostile takeover king," not quite quietly enough. And as for my right to be here, he looked back at me, something softening in his expression. Emma is my wife, has been for 3 years, which makes this very much my business. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that happens when reality shifts so fundamentally that no one knows how to react. I stood there, holding my ruined dress together, watching my carefully separated worlds collide and merge into something I didn't recognize. The simple wedding I'd planned was destroyed. The normal life I'd thought I wanted was impossible now, and the man I'd married as a business arrangement was standing in a church defending me with a possessiveness that suggested our contract had become something neither of us had ever intended. The revelation of Alexander's identity sent shockwaves through the small church bridal room that rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. I watched faces change from righteous anger to confusion to fear as they processed what they were seeing. Not just a wealthy man, but Alexander Thorne, the name whispered in boardrooms and feared in corporate battles, standing in their midst like a wolf among sheep. Ryan's uncle, who worked at a small investment firm, was actually backing toward the door, his face pale with the kind of recognition that comes from knowing exactly how much power had just walked into the room. 3 years. Ryan repeated, his voice hollow. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which, in a way, he was. "You've been married to Alexander Thorne for 3 years, and you were going to marry me today?" Before I could answer, Alexander moved past everyone to stand directly in front of me, his large frame blocking me from their stares. With movements so gentle they seemed impossible from someone radiating such controlled fury, he took off his suit jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders, covering my torn dress. The jacket smelled like him, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely Alexander, a scent that had become home in ways I'd never admitted to myself. "The marriage was a business arrangement," I said, finding my voice even though it shook. "It was supposed to be temporary, just paperwork, but it became real," Alexander finished, his eyes never leaving mine. "It became everything." Victoria laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "You expect us to believe that? That someone like you," she gestured at Alexander with barely concealed fear, "married someone like her for business? What possible business could require?" "Careful." Alexander's voice cut through her words like a blade. "Very careful about how you finish that sentence. Emma is worth more than everyone in this room combined. And if you can't see that, it says everything about your limitations, not hers." He turned back to me, his hand coming up to gently touch my bruised cheek, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that I'd only seen once before. The night his grandmother died, and he'd held me while he cried. The only time I'd ever seen him vulnerable. "I should have been here," he said quietly, "just for me. I should have protected you from this." "How did you even know?" I asked. "Because Alexander was supposed to be in Tokyo closing a deal worth hundreds of millions, not standing in a small church in suburban Pennsylvania." "Your cousin Sarah," he said, surprising me. "She called my office yesterday, worried about you marrying Ryan. She thought something was off, that you were settling for less than you deserved. My assistant recognized your name and contacted me immediately." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I've been outside for the last 20 minutes, listening, waiting to see if you'd go through with it." When I heard the tearing sound, heard the slap. His hands clenched again. "Nothing in Tokyo was worth letting you face this alone." Penelope, who'd been silent since Alexander's arrival, finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "We didn't know. If we'd known who she really was, you would have treated her with respect?" Alexander turned on her, and everyone in the room took an involuntary step back. "You would have valued her? Been kind to her? Is that what you're saying? That Emma only deserves basic human dignity if she's married to someone with money?" The truth of his words hung in the air like an accusation, because that's exactly what they were saying, what they'd always been saying with their subtle digs and obvious condescension. They hadn't seen Emma the person. They'd only seen Emma the liability, the embarrassment, the girl who wasn't good enough for their social circle. "The prenup," Ryan said suddenly, looking at his sister. "You said we needed a prenup to protect my assets from her. My $50,000 in savings and my Honda Civic. You wanted to protect that from someone married to—" He gestured helplessly at Alexander. "Do you have any idea how insane that sounds now?" Alexander actually smiled at that, though it wasn't a kind expression. 50,000? He pulled out his phone again, typed for a moment. "There. I just donated 10 times that amount to the church's renovation fund in Emma's name. Consider it payment for the use of their facilities today, even though there won't be a wedding." The church secretary, who'd been hovering in the doorway with wide eyes, made a small squeaking sound and ran to check her computer. Within seconds we heard her scream, "Oh my Lord! Oh my blessed Lord! It's real!" But I wasn't paying attention to the chaos around us anymore. I was looking at Alexander, really looking at him, seeing past the expensive suit and the power plays to the man who'd flown across the world because someone had hurt me. This was the same man who'd held my hair when I got food poisoning from sketchy takeout, who'd spent 3 hours helping me perfect a particularly difficult embroidery stitch just because I mentioned struggling with it, who left me voice messages every night when he traveled just so I could fall asleep to his voice. "Why?" I asked him. "Why did you really come?" His hand came up to cup my uninjured cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "Because for 3 years I've watched you try to be 2 different people. The woman you thought you should be and the woman you actually are. I've watched you hide your intelligence, your ambition, your strength, all because you thought being ordinary would make you happy. But you're not ordinary, Emma. You never were. I just wanted something simple," I whispered. "Something uncomplicated." "I know," he said. "And I tried to give you that space, to let you figure out what you really wanted. But when Sarah called, when I realized you were about to marry someone else—" He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "I couldn't let you go. Not without fighting for us. Not without telling you that our marriage stopped being just business the moment you told me my tie was crooked at our wedding and fixed it yourself. 3 years, Emma. 3 years of pretending we were just fulfilling a contract when we both know it became real before the ink was even dry." Ryan stepped forward then, and I could see the pain in his eyes, the betrayal, but also something else. Understanding, maybe, or resignation. "You love him," he said. Not a question, but a statement. "You've been in love with him this whole time." I wanted to deny it, to salvage something from this disaster, but Alexander was right. I was tired of being 2 different people, tired of pretending I didn't feel what I felt. "I thought I could love you," I told Ryan honestly. "I thought what we had would be enough, that simple and safe would make me happy. But you were already happy," Ryan finished, just too scared to admit it. He looked at Alexander, then back at me. "The way you're looking at each other. I never stood a chance, did I?" Before anyone could respond, police sirens wailed outside, getting closer. Victoria had apparently made good on her threat to call them, though she looked less certain about that decision now. 2 officers entered, looking confused by the scene. A bride in a torn dress wearing a man's suit jacket, a room full of well-dressed people in various states of shock, and Alexander Thorne looking like he was ready to buy the entire police department just to make them go away. "We got a call about attempted fraud?" the older officer said, pulling out his notepad. Victoria stepped forward, though with considerably less confidence than before. This woman was attempting to commit bigamy. She's already married and was trying to marry my son. The officer looked at me, then at Alexander. "Ma'am, are you currently married?" "Yes," I said clearly. "To him, Alexander Thorne." "And were you planning to marry someone else today while still being married?" Alexander pulled out his phone and showed the officer something on the screen. "Here's our marriage certificate, dated 3 years ago. And here's the email Emma sent to the courthouse last week, inquiring about divorce proceedings. She was planning to file before today, but the office was closed for renovations. She made the appointment for Monday morning." I stared at him in shock. I had sent that email, had made that appointment, but how did he know? As if reading my mind, he said quietly, "My lawyer notified me. I've been trying to figure out how to fight it, how to convince you to give us a real chance when Sarah called." The officer looked between us, then at Ryan. "Sir, were you aware your fiancé was married?" "No," Ryan said quietly. "But I don't want to press charges. This is a personal matter, not a criminal one." The officers seemed relieved to not have to arrest someone at a wedding, especially when one of the parties involved could probably buy their entire precinct. They took some basic information and left with warnings about wasting police resources, leaving us all standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be my wedding day. Penelope, who'd been silent for so long I'd almost forgotten she was there, suddenly stepped forward. Her designer shoes clicked on the floor as she approached, and I instinctively tensed, but Alexander's presence beside me was like a shield. She stopped just out of reach, her face a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time since I'd met her she sounded genuine. "Not because of who you're married to, but because you're right. All of you are right. We treated you terribly, and we justified it by telling ourselves you weren't good enough, weren't successful enough, weren't enough. But the truth is, we were threatened by you." "Threatened?" I couldn't help but ask. "By me?" "You were content," she said, tears starting to smear her perfect makeup. "Actually content with your simple life, your small apartment, your old car. Do you know how terrifying that is to people like us who need constant validation? Who measure our worth in dollars and designer labels? You made us feel shallow, so we tried to make you feel small." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me, and in that moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. My cheek still throbbed from her slap, and my beautiful handmade dress was still ruined, but I understood what she was saying. My contentment with less had been a mirror that showed them the emptiness of their more. "Your hand," I said to Penelope, noticing she was cradling it against her chest. "Is it hurt?" She looked surprised that I'd noticed, more surprised that I cared. "I think I might have fractured it when I—" She gestured vaguely at my face, unable to say the words. Without hesitation, Alexander called his personal physician, arranging for Penelope to be seen immediately at a private clinic. It was a kindness she didn't deserve, but one that perfectly illustrated who Alexander really was beneath the ruthless businessman exterior. Someone who took care of problems, even for people who'd hurt someone he loved. As Penelope left with her mother, both of them subdued and somehow smaller than they'd seemed an hour ago, Ryan approached us one last time. He'd removed his boutonniere, was holding it like he didn't know what to do with it. "The guests," he said. "They're all waiting in the chapel. Someone should tell them." "I'll do it," I said, surprising everyone, including myself. "They came for a wedding that's not happening. They deserve an explanation from me." Alexander's hand tightened on my shoulder. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," I said, standing straighter despite my ruined dress and bruised face. "I've been hiding for 3 years, letting people make assumptions about me, accepting their pity and their condescension because it was easier than standing up for myself. But I'm done hiding. I'm done being less than I am to make other people comfortable." We walked into the chapel together, Alexander and I, and the whispers started immediately. 100 guests who'd come to see simple Emma marry regular Ryan were instead witnessing something none of them had expected. I stood at the altar where I should have been taking vows and looked out at the sea of curious, shocked faces. "There won't be a wedding today," I said, my voice carrying stronger than I'd expected. "Not because I'm a fraud or a gold digger or any of the other things you're probably thinking, but because I've been living a lie, and it needs to stop." I told them everything. About meeting Alexander. About the arrangement that became love. About trying to be 2 different people and failing at both. I told them about choosing to stay small because I thought it would make me happier. About accepting their low opinions of me because fighting back seemed too exhausting. I told them the truth, that I was tired of apologizing for who I was, tired of making myself less so they could feel like more. "I made my own wedding dress," I said, touching the torn fabric. "Every stitch by hand, hundreds of hours of work. It's ruined now. But it was beautiful, because I made it, because it came from my own creativity and skill. That's what I forgot, somewhere along the way. That, creating something with your own hands, living authentically, even if it's not impressive to others, that has value. I have value, not because of who I'm married to or what's in my bank account, but because of who I am." The chapel was silent when I finished, and then, surprisingly, someone started clapping. It was my cousin Sarah, the one who'd called Alexander, standing up in her bridesmaid dress with tears streaming down her face. Then others joined, not everyone, but enough. Enough to make me realize that not everyone had seen me as less than. Some had just been waiting for me to see myself as more. As we left the church, Alexander stopped me by his car. Not a limousine or some flashy sports car, but a simple black sedan, because he'd learned over 3 years what I was comfortable with. "The divorce papers," he said quietly. "Were you really going to file them?" I looked at him, this complicated, brilliant, frustrating man who'd become my home when I wasn't paying attention. I thought I was. I thought I needed something simpler, something that made more sense. But Ryan was right. I was already happy. I was just too scared to admit that happiness doesn't have to look the way other people expect it to. "So what now?" he asked. And for the first time since I'd met him, Alexander Thorne looked uncertain. I took off his jacket and handed it back to him, standing there in my ruined wedding dress in front of a church full of gossiping guests, my face bruised, and my carefully constructed walls completely demolished. Now we stop pretending. No more separate lives, no more hiding. We be married, really married, not just on paper but in life. I move into the penthouse. You meet my book club. We figure out how to be us without the pretense. "Your book club is going to lose their minds when they find out you're married to me," he said, a real smile breaking across his face. "They already know," I admitted. "I told them 6 months ago. They've been keeping the secret, letting me work through it at my own pace." Gladys, the 80-year-old retired teacher, said she knew I was married to someone important because I stopped complaining about men and started complaining about which coffee maker to buy. Alexander laughed, really laughed, and pulled me into his arms right there in front of everyone. "We're really doing this? No more hiding?" "Number more hiding," I confirmed. Though I'm keeping my job at the alteration shop. I love that work, love creating things with my hands. "I wouldn't expect anything else," he said. "But maybe we can upgrade the lighting in your workspace, and get you better equipment, and possibly buy the building so your rent never goes up." "Alexander, I know, don't try to fix everything with money. But Emma, letting me take care of you in some ways doesn't diminish who you are. It just means you're loved." Standing there in the ruins of one wedding in the beginning of a real marriage, I realized he was right. Love didn't have to look like what other people expected. It didn't have to be simple or complicated, rich or poor, visible or hidden. It just had to be real. And ours, despite its unconventional beginning, was the realest thing I'd ever known. 6 months later, I stood in my alteration shop, now with excellent lighting and ergonomic equipment, working on a wedding dress for a client. My own torn wedding dress hung on the wall behind me, framed like art, because Alexander insisted that symbols of survival should be displayed, not hidden. The tear had been mended with golden thread, Japanese kintsugi style, making the repair part of its beauty rather than something to hide. Penelope came in that day, as she did every week now, not as a customer but as someone learning to sew. After everything that happened, she'd had what she called an existential crisis about never having created anything with her own hands. I taught her basic stitches, helped her make simple items, watched her discover the satisfaction of making something from nothing. We weren't friends exactly, but we were something. 2 women who'd learned that worth isn't measured in dollars or status but in the courage to be authentic. The door chimed, and Alexander walked in with lunch, as he did every day he wasn't traveling. He kissed me hello, completely ignoring the stunned look from my new client who recognized him from a recent magazine cover. This was our life now. No hiding, no pretending, just us being ourselves in all our contradictory glory. "Mrs. Chen wants to know if you're free for dinner tonight," he said, referring to our elderly neighbor who'd adopted us both and regularly forced us to eat her dumplings. "She says you're too skinny and I'm too serious, and both problems can be solved with proper food." "Tell her yes," I said, not looking up from my stitching. "But you're doing the dishes." "Deal," he said, then noticed Penelope struggling with a particularly difficult seam. Without hesitation, he sat down beside her and helped guide her hands, the Billionaire CEO, teaching his former tormentor-in-law how to sew, because that's what family does. Even the complicated, messy, chosen kind of family we'd become. That night, as I lay in bed in our penthouse looking out at the city lights, Alexander asked me the question he asked every week. "Any regrets?" "Just one," I said, and felt him tense beside me. I wish I'd stood up for myself sooner. I wish I hadn't waited for a crisis to start living authentically. But then we might not have found our way to this. he pointed out. He was right, of course. Every choice, every moment of hiding, every failed attempt at being someone else had led us here. To this perfectly imperfect life where I was both a billionaire's wife and a simple seamstress. Where we ate five-star dinners one night and Mrs. Chen's dumplings the next. Where love didn't look like anyone expected but exactly like what we needed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.